Okay, we are in the midst. So we're in the midst of learning about the elusive hanidachas in the fourth chapter of Hilchos Vodos Kochavim of the Rambam. So let me open up. We are at halacha halacha Zayin. So we just finished. So we just finished learning about the procession where the Bezdin would go and they would warn them, and they would go and if they were chayav, then they would give them chenek. If they came out to be the minority, then they would only give them, not only, but they would give them skila. So on to number 7. Nichsei hatzadikim shebetocha vehem sha'ar yoshvei ha'ir shelo hudchu. So here's the question. Let's say if you have tzadikim. Now it's funny how the Rambam calls them tzadikim. They're just not, let's say if majority, right? So a majority of the inhabitants, right, end up sinning, but there are people who don't. So on the one hand, only those who sin get put to death, but those who don't sin, the question is, what happens to them, right? So they don't get put to death, right? So the Rambam calls them tzaddikim, okay, nisrafin, but nevertheless, their property, okay, gets burned because what they call collateral damage, right? Nisrafin b'chlal shlala, right? Hol b'yashvu sham, because they were associated with bad people, even though they were good. But unfortunately, that's not how it works all the time. So mamonim avad, their money or their possessions get destroyed. Right? And if you take, literally means, if you benefit, okay, from anything that is supposed to be burnt and destroyed, you're chayiv malchus. It's a lo taseh. Shenemar v'lo yidbak b'cha me'umim min hacherem, which basically means that there's a prohibition of getting any benefit, okay, from the hanidachas, right? We said it has to be destroyed. And if it doesn't get destroyed, you can't take anything from it. Okay? So that's one of the many, many, many nuances that we have from this hanidachas. Okay. So here we got an interesting halacha number 8. Halacha ches. Hanidachas shehuzmu eideha kol hamachzik b'nechaseha zacha umuter lahanos bo sheharei huzmu. So here's something that you would never think of unless you're the Rambam. Let's say it looks like we have an hanidachas in the making. Okay? And remember what the Rambam says? The witnesses have to come, and then they have to warn them, and then they have to sin again, and they have to be bad, and then the witnesses have to report them to the Supreme Court in Yerushalayim, right? That's how it worked. So let's say the two witnesses that came to give them hasra, to give them warning, are found out to be liars. Meaning, let's just use names, okay? We have, let's say, a newlywed couple, Avraham and Sarah, are living in a house in, what's the example we gave last week? Haifa, okay? And Haifa is about to be an hanidachas. So two witnesses named Reuven and Shimon, they claim that they went to the house of Avram and Sarah, and they were warned not to do avodah zarah, and they did avodah zarah anyway, and they said that they were led by a couple of ringleaders who convinced everyone to do avodah zarah. Okay, so Reuven and Shimon's job is to report back to the court and say, we gave them warning and they sinned anyway. So that's how it works. What happened is that Levi and Yehuda pop out of the woodwork and they go to court and say, Reuven and Shimon, who claim to have been two witnesses giving Avraham and Sarah warning, couldn't have given them warning because they were with me on a business trip in Cyprus that week. So we don't know if Avram and Sarah did avodah zarah. The only thing I can tell you is that Reuven and Shimon were with us in Cyprus for the week. So that's a problem, okay? Because the Torah allows Levi and Yehuda to passel Reuven and Shimon, even though we don't know who's telling the truth. But one of the nuances of an Eid Zomem is that the last two witnesses left standing or who speak are believed. Okay? Because in reality, it goes on, because if Yisachar and Zvulun come to Bezdin the next day and say, how could Levi and Yehuda say that Reuven and Shimon were with them in Cyprus, right? Shimon, Levi and Yehuda were with us in Egypt that week. So, and this goes on, and you could do this forever. But the bottom line, the Gemara calls this in a couple of places a chiddush. It's really, a gzeras hakasuv, or it's a gzera, that the last two witnesses are believed. So what's the punishment? Back to our simple case of Reuven and Shimon, the two witnesses. So those two witnesses have to suffer the consequences of what they intended to do to our couple, Avraham and Sarah. What did they want to do to them? Well, they wanted Avraham and Sarah to die or to get beheaded. That's what Reuven and Shimon's intent was. So we say, V'asisem lo kasher zamam lasus la'achev. So we do to the witnesses what was intended to do, what they intended to do to Avram and Sarah, i.e., we're going to kill Reuven and Shimon. Okay, so that's a classic case of ir hanidachas. That's a case of Edom Zomimim. So that's okay. But here's the question by an ir hanidachas, because of this crazy situation where it's not just that the people would be put to death, but their possessions are destroyed. We find no other time off the top of my head that I could think of in the Torah where the punishment is not just the death penalty, but they lose all of their belongings. We don't find that by any other crime that you do. You get
Doesn't
put
the
to
Gemara
death.
say that about skila also?
No. I mean, in general, like Chilul Shabbos or your garden variety, no. I mean, I shouldn't say no that fast to you because you're a rabbi, I'm not. 10 times more than me. But off the top of my head, there's no such The only thing that skila has is that you have to hang the body after you get killed. But you're allowed to your Yorshim inherit from you. You have a will, you have a testament, and everything. There's no prohibition of like the nachla doesn't stop, and your house doesn't get blown up. That's not how it works by skila. I don't think, at least. Erni Dachas is the only exception where we don't just take it out on you, we take it out on all of your progenitors. All of your Yorshim suffer, and they can't take that house and sell it like a lot of lucky Yorshim do when their parents die. Okay, well, I didn't mean lucky that way. Anyways, so that's what's going on over here. So here's the question. Okay, the question is, what happens when these two when Reuven and Shimon at the end get busted? So Avraham and Sarah's lives are spared because these witnesses, now they could have done avodah zarah, but the problem is that Reuven and Shimon were disqualified for being witnesses. So what happens to all of Avram and Sarah's belongings, right? All their furniture and their appliances that they had to take out of their house and bring to the middle of the street, right? Remember we learned that? It all gets put up in a bonfire. So what happens to all of their household items? So the Rambam says that someone is allowed to take them. Why? Because in the end, says the Rambam, Shaharei Huzmu, these witnesses, Reuben and Shimon, who are proven to be liars, okay, they weren't there testifying at the right time that they said that they would. And the Rambam says, V'lam zachaba, right? So the answer is kol machzik, meaning it's basically a free-for-all. So once they put their stuff in the middle of the streets, okay, and they were proven that the Edom were proven to be liars, so it's called whoever gets there first grabs it, right? It's called kol hakodem zacha. We have that principle a lot. Now they could grab it also. Avram and Sarah could grab it, but if there's some lucky guy over there, right, who sees this big leather couch in the middle of the road, right, he now has the opportunity to take it, and it's not considered condemned. And the Rambam says, "V'lama zacha basha kol echad ve'echad kvar hifkir mamon mishasha nigmar dino." Because as soon as the Gemar Din, right, Gemar Din came, and then the Edom Zomimim were pronounced Edom Zomimim. I have a question on this Rambam because the Edom Zomimim, once there's a Gemar Din, it's already too late. I don't know. That's my own personal question. I have to understand this Rambam a little bit better. But anyways, putting that difficulty aside, at the end of the day, they thought that they were going to get killed, right? So therefore, they say, okay, we're mafker everything. Avram and Sarah said, that's it. We're going to lose our home. We're going to lose all of our furniture, our cars, and all of our possessions. So at that point, it's called hefker. And whoever grabs from hefker first, if I'm mafker something, whoever grabs, the rule is, the Gemara discusses, the Mishnayos discuss in Gittin, whoever comes first and grabs it, they are the lucky winner. Okay, so that's the complicated discussion about Edom Zomimim vis-a-vis an ir hanidachas. So now the Rambam gets back and he says, "Ve'eno nivnis la'olam." There's another amongst all the unique and unorthodox rulings about an ir hanidachas. Another one is that once this city is nuked, it is not allowed to be rebuilt. Right? Kind of reminds you of Yericho, right? Remember the story in Yehoshua where that dude rebuilt Yericho and his sons died, and right, and he didn't listen, and every time he built it, another son died, right? So we have this is not really a curse, this is just a lo taseh. One of the 613 mitzvot is not to rebuild an ir hanidachas. And if you do rebuild it, you're chayiv malchus. Shenemar lo tibane od. Umuter lasota ginot upardesim. So what do you have? So unfortunately, you're left with a barren strip of land. You can't build anything. So do you have to leave it barren forever? What if you want to build pickleball courts? Right? Is that permitted? So we say yes. We are allowed to do that. You could build courts. You could build gardens and orchards. Shenemar lo tibane od, lo tibane medina kumo shahaisa. You can't rebuild the city the way it used to be, but pickleball courts are absolutely permitted. Okay, now we're going to talk in number 9 about, well, what's considered living there, right? Like now that you go more and more into this, you're like, it's a really, really strange law after law, very, very strange and obscure. So what if I'm there like at a sleepaway camp and I'm only there for like 6 weeks? Or what if I'm visiting for a weekend and I happen to be, as the expression goes, in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So do I get swept up in this, right, in this narishkeit? So the Rambam says in Tes, shayara, not the girls' school, but shayara is literally means a caravan. So if I have people who are on a journey and one of their stops happens to be in the lucky ir hanidachas, so so let's say these people they fell right, for the insiders. They don't live there, right? Remember how we said that they have to live there and they have to be from the same shevet as the insiders. Let's say they're just there on vacation for a few weeks. So im shas hasham shloshim yom. So this rings a bell. This is called the 30-day rule. We have it by, anybody knows where we have a famous 30-day rule? We have it by Pesach, right? By cleaning a house for chametz, right? If you go to someone else's apartment and who's responsible, right? So there's a 30-day rule about who's responsible to clean the apartment. So here you have another 30-day rule, right? About how long do you have to be in a place in order to be considered a citizen vis-a-vis an ir hanidachas. So im shat hasham shloshim yom, if you're there 30 days, right? So let's say you're in camp, right? Camp is 6 weeks. So you're there for at least 30 days, neharagin b'sayef, okay? You are chayiv, you're chayiv, hereg, just like a classic, anshe ir hanidachas umamonam aved, and of course, your money gets destroyed, your possessions get destroyed. V'im lav, right? Hen beskila mamonam liyorshehen. But if you're not there 30 days, you're there for less than 30 days, then you get skila, like a garden variety avodah zara, umamonam liyorshehen, and the property goes. So there's your answer to the question about someone who gets skila, right? And generally, so here you're not a ir hanidachas, but you are over avodah zara. So therefore, at least your yorshim get your stuff. Well, we only did a couple. I'm going to sneak another one in to make up for last night. Yud nichse anshe medina acheres shahaya mufkadin betocha. Okay, so here's another, right? As you go on and on and on, you're going to see that there's more questions arise. For example, you have to burn down the whole city and destroy everything. Let's say if I borrowed clothing and jewelry from a friend who lives in a different place. Okay, so the jewelry didn't sin. So does the jewelry get nuked? Okay, so that's the question. So the jewelry gets saved even if the person who lives in the ir hanidachas, who ends up getting killed, took responsibility and said, I hereby am chayav, right, like a shomer, for example, right, I am responsible if something happens to it. So you would consider it his. So we say, no, it's considered export. It's from a different place, and it doesn't get destroyed. Eliyachru balehen, it goes back to its owner of the different city. Shenemar shlala v'lo shlal chaberta. The pasuk says shlala, right, the booty of that city, and not a neighboring city. Okay, here's the inverse of that problem. Nechsei harishayim shehudchu shahayim mufkadim dina acheres. Let's say my jewelry, I live in ir hanidachas, and I lent my jewelry to someone else in a different city. Okay, this is the opposite problem. Okay, im nikbetzu ima nisrafen b'chlala. If somehow that jewelry or that clothing happened to be gathered in the bonfire pile, so we say nisrafen b'chlala, it gets included the imlav. If it stayed in the other city and never found its way back, eid ma'abdin osam el yinatnu liyorshehem. Right, it gets spared and it goes to the Yorshim, which is interesting because we know that it should have been destroyed, okay, but because it wasn't technically in the ir hanidachas at the time of the sinning, so therefore it gets saved from the bomb. Okay, we'll stop here. Actually, we'll do one more because it's a short one. Number 11, Yud Aleph. Right, the question gets even deeper. How about if I have an animal that's a 50% owned by someone who lives in ir hanidachas and 50% owned by someone who lives in a neighboring city? Now, in a perfect world, you'd be able to split it in half, but you can't split an animal in half. So the Rambam says, "Behema chetzi shel ir hanidachas chetzi shel acheres shahaisa b'tocha harezu asura." So what do we say? When in doubt, because it's 50-50, it's forbidden. How about ve'isa? Let's say if I have a bakery and I have a big challah that I have prepared, right? Like you see at the weddings, the chassan, the challah, right? $100 challah, right? And it's a partnership, right? Muteres lefisha efshar lachalka. That doesn't get destroyed because one owner can cut half of the challah away and keep it. Just in case you were wondering. Okay, we'll stop there. Have a good weekend.
Thank